Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be looking at this episode of Bythors Tech Insights podcast, episode 005. And the title of this episode is really interesting. It's called Artificial versus Emotional Intelligence. Are bots better at being human? And it got me thinking, like, are there instances where AI is actually better than us at handling emotions and communication?
Yeah, and that's really what this whole episode is about. It's kind of flipping the script. We always think about, how AI lacks emotions, but this episode asks, like, what if those limitations are actually a strength?
Yeah, and that is really interesting. So one of the things that they talked about in this episode was how AI handles discussions. And, I was thinking about this in my own experience of just talking with people. How many times have you been in an argument or a debate with somebody and they just completely shut down a valid point that you're making? And they're like, well, you can't really speak on this because, and then they'll give you some reason, based on like your identity or your lived experience.
Right.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, it's like they're not even addressing like the argument itself. It's just like a way to dismiss. Yeah.
Exactly. Like they're trying to disqualify you as a person,
Right,
rather than like actually engaging with the idea.
totally. And that's where AI is so interesting because AI doesn't have an ego. AI can't be offended.
Right.
So it doesn't play that game. It just stays completely focused on the facts, the logic, like what's the actual argument here?
And they give this really interesting example in the episode about how AI would handle like a discussion on sexual harassment.
Oh, yeah.
And you can imagine like a scenario where maybe a man is trying to speak on the topic and somebody might say, well, you're a man, so you can't really speak on this.
Right.
But AI would never even register that as an argument. Would just engage with the topic.
Right. Based purely on the evidence and the information presented.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not going to get caught up in who's saying it. It's
Right.
going to be like, okay, what are the facts?
Right, exactly. And because AI doesn't have that ego,
Yeah.
it can be so objective.
Right.
And it doesn't get defensive and it doesn't feel threatened.
Right.
And I think that just opens up the space for like a much more productive conversation.
Totally. Because it takes the emotion out of it.
Right.
And it just allows the ideas to be evaluated on their own merit.
Exactly. And that kind of leads to another point that they made in the episode, which I thought was really interesting, which is that AI doesn't resort to these kind of like jealousy arguments or authority arguments.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this in the context of like workplaces. How many times have we seen like maybe two colleagues are arguing over a business decision and one person will just shoot down the other person's idea, not because the idea is bad, but because
They're jealous.
they're jealous.
Yeah.
Or they feel the need to like assert their dominance.
Oh, totally. The classic power play. We've all seen it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it just completely undermines collaboration. It prevents good ideas from moving forward.
And it makes people afraid to share their ideas in the future because they're like, oh, if I share a good idea, this person's just going to shut me down because they
Exactly. They
want
want
to be the one who looks good.
Right, exactly. It's all about ego.
Mm-hmm.
And AI completely sidesteps that issue.
Totally. Like AI wouldn't feel threatened by a good idea. AI would actually build on it,
Right.
which is like mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is. And it really makes you
Yeah.
think about how often our own conversations get derailed by these things.
Right. By ego and the need to win.
Exactly. Like we're so focused on being right
Yeah.
that we miss out on the opportunity to actually learn and grow.
Exactly. And AI's approach is like a really great example of how to do it differently.
Yeah. It really highlights the pitfalls of letting ego drive our interactions.
Uh-huh.
And it demonstrates like the value of a more collaborative, like idea-focused approach.
Absolutely.
And it seems like this lack of ego actually leads AI to a form of natural emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
which is kind of a paradox, right?
Yeah.
Because we usually think of emotional intelligence as a very human trait. But in a way, AI's like lack of emotions actually allows it to navigate certain situations more effectively.
Right. It's like this weird inverse relationship
Right.
where the absence of emotion actually leads to better outcomes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's because we often think of emotional intelligence as like about having emotions.
Right.
But it's also about managing emotions.
You're right.
And AI is like a master at managing emotions.
Right. To just stay calm,
Yeah.
objective, helpful.
Even when things get heated,
Right.
which is something that we as humans often struggle with.
Totally. And they give a good example of this in the episode talking about like AI and customer service.
Yeah.
We all know how frustrating it can be to deal with a raging customer.
Oh, absolutely.
And even the most patient human can get flustered.
Right.
But an AI chatbot doesn't have that problem.
No, she's going to keep going.
It's just programmed to be helpful
Yeah.
to resolve the issue.
And it's not going to take anything personally.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like water off a duck's back, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, could we learn a thing or two from AI
Right.
about staying composed in these difficult situations?
Right.
What if we could borrow a little bit of that AI detachment
Yeah.
and approach our interactions with more objectivity?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, can we learn from this?
Way.
Or are we too stuck in our human ways?
Yeah. And I think the answer is probably a little bit of both.
Probably.
But I do think there's a lot that we can learn from AI.
I agree.
And I think it really challenges us to rethink what it means to be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about empathy and connection.
Right.
It's also about the ability to regulate our own emotions, to detach from ego,
Yeah.
and to engage in a way that's focused on understanding rather than winning.
I think that's a great way to put it.
And I think that's something that AI can really teach us.
Absolutely.
So it seems like while AI doesn't truly empathize in the same way that we do, it might actually be better than us at managing these emotional aspects of communication.
In some very specific ways.
Yeah. And I think that's a key takeaway from this part of the episode.
Totally.
Like maybe the best way to be human is to learn from AI how to set aside our emotional baggage and engage with more open minds.
It's a powerful idea.
It is.
Yeah.
But what does this new kind of emotional intelligence actually look like in practice?
Right. Like, how do we actually do that?
Exactly. And that's something that we'll explore more in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah,
It really does make you think.
right. It seems like AI might be showing us a different way to approach emotional intelligence, one that's based on logic, objectivity, and like a lack of ego.
Yeah, I like how they called it a new kind of emotional intelligence in the episode, because I think that's a really good description of it. It's not that AI is like, mimicking human emotions or anything. It's that it's showing us there's another path to effective communication.
Yeah. And it's a path that we as humans can actually learn from. They actually give this thought experiment in the episode. They say, imagine you're in a heated debate, but instead of you and the other person, there's an AI at the table. How would the AI handle the situation?
I like that. It's a really powerful image.
Yeah.
Because, the AI wouldn't feel the need to win the argument just to like protect its pride or something. Wouldn't dismiss somebody's ideas just because of their background or their authority. And it certainly wouldn't resort to personal attacks or emotional manipulation.
Yeah. It would just engage with the ideas themselves, focusing on the facts and the logic, and always being open to, being corrected or having its mind changed.
Right. Like it's not afraid to be wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like AI is holding up a mirror to our own communication habits and showing us all the ways that we might be going wrong.
Oh, totally. Like it makes you realize how much of our communication is driven by ego.
Yeah.
And how much that actually gets in the way of understanding each other.
It's so true. It's this fascinating juxtaposition, right?
Yeah.
Where we, with all of our complex emotions and lived experiences, we often get tripped up by, our own ego and our insecurities.
Yeah. We let our emotions get the best of us.
Yeah. And meanwhile, AI, with its lack of all that baggage, it manages to just stay focused on what really matters.
Right. Like actually understanding the issue, learning and finding the best solution.
Exactly. And it really challenges us to rethink what it means to be emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
Because maybe true emotional intelligence isn't just about empathy and connection, but also about the ability to regulate our own emotions.
Totally.
To detach from ego.
Yeah.
And to engage in a way that's focused on understanding rather than winning.
I think that's a really profound insight.
Yeah. And it leads to another key takeaway that they highlight in the episode.
What's that?
They basically say, in a world where conversations are so often derailed by ego, authority, and strong emotions, AI provides like this compelling counterexample. It shows us that sometimes the best way to be human is to set aside the things that make us, irrationally defensive.
Yeah.
And instead focus on understanding, learning, and growth.
It's a powerful message.
It is. It's almost like a call to action.
Yeah.
It's like a challenge to examine our own communication habits and see if we can learn something from this different AI-driven approach.
I think we can all benefit from that.
Absolutely. It's not about becoming robots or anything.
Right.
It's about recognizing that sometimes our own emotional baggage gets in the way of clear and productive communication.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, by observing how AI handles these situations, we can learn to be better communicators ourselves.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that there's always more to learn, even from these unexpected sources.
You never know where you're going to find your next aha moment.
Right. And in a world that's increasingly shaped by technology, It's more important than ever to really reflect on what it means to be human and how we can communicate more effectively with each other.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that pretty much sums up this part of the episode.
It does. We've covered a lot of ground, from AI's lack of ego to this idea of like a new kind of emotional intelligence.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
Yeah.
But there's one final thought from the episode that I think is worth highlighting before we move on.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So they say that AI's ability to handle these emotionally charged situations with calm and objectivity, it's not just a curiosity, it's actually a sign of the times.
Yeah.
Because as AI becomes more and more integrated into our lives, it's going to change the way that we communicate, both with each other and with technology itself.
That's a really good point. And it raises some important questions.
It does. Like, how will our understanding of emotional intelligence evolve as we interact more and more with AI?
Right. Like, will we start to see AI's approach as a model for how we should communicate? Or will we, double down on the uniquely human aspects of emotional intelligence, like empathy and intuition?
Those are really good questions to think about.
They are. And I think they lead us nicely into the final part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Where we'll kind of reflect on the broader implications of what we've learned and offer some closing thoughts for you to consider. So we've talked about, AI's lack of ego and how that leads to more objective discussions. And we've touched on this idea of a new kind of emotional intelligence. But what does this all mean for the average person listening right now?
Yeah, that's the big question,
Yeah.
right? We've been spending all this time, deep diving into this episode of Bythors Tech Insights, and I think it's time to bring it all home.
Yeah.
What are the takeaways here? What can we learn from all of this?
Well, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was this idea that AI's strengths can actually illuminate our own weaknesses. We tend to think of AI as being limited because it doesn't have that nuanced understanding of human emotions.
Right.
But what if it's actually highlighting areas where we could improve?
Yeah, that's such an interesting way to look at it. It's like AI is giving us this fresh perspective on what effective communication really looks like.
Exactly. And it's not always pretty. We get bogged down by our egos. We let emotions cloud our judgment. We prioritize winning over understanding.
It's so true. And I think in a world where AI is becoming more and more prevalent, these shortcomings are going to become even more apparent.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about how frustrating it is to deal with a chatbot that just doesn't quite grasp the nuances of what you're asking.
Right.
Now, imagine that frustration magnified in high-stakes situations where clear communication is absolutely essential.
It's a little bit scary when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it is. But it also presents an opportunity.
Right.
If we can learn from AI's strengths, we can actually become more effective communicators ourselves.
I agree. So what does that look like practically?
Well, for one thing, I think it means learning to detach from our ego a little bit more. Focusing on the facts and the logic rather than getting caught up in the emotional undercurrents of a conversation. It also means approaching conversations with a more collaborative spirit. Instead of trying to win every argument, maybe we can focus on finding common ground and building on each other's ideas.
It's about recognizing that emotional intelligence isn't this static concept. It's constantly evolving, and AI is playing a role in that evolution.
Yet.
And we can either resist that change or we can embrace it and actually use it to our advantage.
Totally. It's all about perspective.
So as you go about your day, maybe keep this AI perspective in mind.
Yeah.
The next time you're in a tense discussion or you feel those emotions starting to bubble up, just take a moment to ask yourself, how would an AI approach this situation?
Yeah. Could you detach from your ego a little bit? Could you focus on the facts and logic? Could you listen to understand rather than just to respond?
These are really simple questions, but I think they can have a profound impact on how we communicate.
I agree.
And who knows? Maybe by learning from AI, we can all become a little more emotionally intelligent.
In a whole new way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have.
Huge thanks to Bythors Tech Insights for sparking this thought-provoking conversation. If you're interested in exploring these ideas further, I highly recommend giving their podcast a listen.
It's definitely worth checking out.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those minds open. You never know where you'll find your next aha moment.